So hello everyone, welcome back to our second lecture for the Design++ seminar series. Tonight we are very excited and happy to host Dr. Daniela Mitterberger to give her lecture titled Strange Comfort, Intuitive Machines and Robotic Gardeners. But before we go into Daniela's talk, maybe we just a little quick reminder. So if you want to follow up our updates on the Design++ initiative, events and/or lectures given in previous semesters as well, please feel free to subscribe to our YouTube channel or any other social media channels so you keep informed of what's going to happen next. I am, of course, only the tip of the iceberg. This whole event is organized by a larger team, together with Andreas, Erika, Danielle, and Nijad, and also with the support of Vera. So this is the whole team responsible for the Design++ seminar series. But let's dive into today's talk. So we have, as I said, for many of us, or at least associated with the ITA Institute, Daniela is definitely a familiar face, so we're very happy to see her back. So Daniela finished her PhD here at the ETH, the Chair of Grammatica and Color Research Group, and she's now holding a position as assistant professor at the School of Architecture of Princeton University. Alongside the academic responsibility and commitment, she, together with Tiziano Derme, she is co-founder and director of MAEID, an interdisciplinary architecture practice based in Innsbruck. So throughout her work as a postdoc, Daniela was sort of strictly involved in sort of research and teaching activities in between sort of different institutes in Switzerland, Austria, Australia, and so on. But she was also my predecessors here at the Design++. She was the co-lead of the Immersive Design Lab, which I responsibly took over. So I'm very pleased for that. So her work has been sort of recognized sort of internationally, both academic and practice work, and has been exhibited to sort of renowned events, sort of like the Venice Biennale, Seoul Biennale, Ars Electronica, just to name a few. The talk, so Daniela's interests has always been about so understanding the synergies between machines and humans, and more fundamentally how then these interactions and so the interactions between these two agents can be then exploited to develop new methodologies for architectural design, fabrication, and as we see today, maybe question how do we cohabit with the natural world and how do we co-live with nature in general. Some of the work that we will see today, so it's sort of case studies directly from academic work and the work done with MAEID. And in Daniela's work, these case studies combine architectural design, sensor systems, robotic fabrication, machine learning, and microbiology, and show how we can create fertile ground for new relationships between human, nature, and technology. And with that, I just please help me to welcome Daniela, and the stage is yours.
Thank you so much, Fabio. Thanks a lot for the invite. I'm really happy to be back. It hasn't been that long, but I'm excited to show a part of the work that maybe not everyone here knows. So today I'm going to present to you a talk that I titled Strange Comfort, Intuitive Machines and Robotic Gardeners. So this talk will explore technology as a primary mediator and a familiar medium for structuring our relationship with the built and the natural environment. And I will explain throughout the talk why I think we as architects should deal with that, and also a little bit my approach towards technology, not just in the fabrication of architecture, but also in the design and understanding of architecture. As Fabio already mentioned, I just recently migrated to the United States. That's the lab at Princeton called Embodied Computation Lab, where I'm working as an assistant professor. And I'm focusing there on digital and robotic fabrication, as well as computational design. And in particular, we are researching and working on human-machine collaboration. We work on construction robotics, with special focus on embodied computation and extended reality systems. If you know a little bit of my academic work, so there are some of the examples that I was doing here as part of my PhD research at Kamatsu Kola Research. You see that my question in architecture is also always how we interact with the environment through technology and through computational means. And I focused my PhD on intuition and computational design and in robotic fabrication. And I always looked at technology as a means to translate data to us as humans via intuitive interfaces, as well as create intuitive interfaces to enable humans to interact with machines in a more human and a more intuitive way. And by that, also exploring different relationships that we can have between the human and the machine, as well as the human and the environment, and in following that line of thought, also in the realms of architecture. But as I already mentioned today, I'm going to skip the academic realm. I'm going to go to a realm that is in the field of art and science. A field that I find personally very, very interesting, and that it becomes, especially in an academic environment, more and more prominent. It's a field where it says that research should not necessarily lead to products, but actually we should research with open research questions that might lead to failure. And this acceptance of failure has the potential of interesting and creative research. It's a work that is very interdisciplinary. So all the projects that I'm going to show are not solely done by me. They are first and foremost done together with Tiziano Derme in our architecture office MAEID in Innsbruck currently, but it's also done with a huge collaborations of researchers. It's another thing that I say, I'm an architect. I work with computers, I work with robots, and I work with machines. But especially when it comes to biomaterials, when it comes to research in that domain, we work with experts in the fields. That means we work with microbiologists, and a lot of the work is also in the communication between the different research fields. So in our office MAEID, we focus on interactive and performative architecture. You will later understand that we understand performative architecture not necessarily as an architecture that has motors and moves, but actually an architecture that reacts to the presence of a human, ideally with a metabolic reaction, connecting sensor systems and digital fabrication with biodegradable materials. That means we are focusing on 3 different domains, which is machines or robotic fabrication, computational design, as well as new material systems that allow us to create these reactive environments. It all starts with how do we stand towards nature? I get a lot of times the question, isn't it landscape architecture that we're doing? I have to say for me or for us, the thematic of a garden is a very architectural one because it's an expression of our spatial condition that we are embedded within. So it's a very particular context of resources, species, and our relation to this environmental context. And at the same time, we understand architecture not just as a medium to shelter the human body, but as a kind of an interface that connects us with the environment. And the garden is a very interesting medium that allows us to express this relationship that we have with the environment. At the same time, we always get the question, okay, you work with gardens, but aren't machines very separate from nature? And that's where it starts to become very interesting for us because we see that we have machines that produce very distinct kinds of natural environments. But at the same time, this integration of these machines are an expression of our understanding of our environment. So gardens have historically served as a way to express this relationship with nature. And in Western culture, this link between gardens and machines has often revolved around controlled automation and maintenance. The project that I show tries to change this approach, going away from automation of nature to the creation of potentially a new kind of nature that is not anymore focused on the idea of completely, entirely controlling it, looking at monocultures, for instance, but creating a nature that would otherwise not be possible and is not entirely in our control. Of course, these thoughts did not start with us. I always like to show these slides because these are just a few of the examples coming from art, where you see that these thoughts evolved since a long time. And also this idea of using a garden as a medium to express a metaphor or to express a particular thought is, of course, nothing new. I always say it's I like the first robotic garden that we found while we were already working on robotic gardens of Goldberg and Santo Ramana, actually shown in Ars Electronica in 1995. Already showed a lot of the ideas that we then also picked up and showed again in our work. The idea of the robotic gardeners started very differently. They started with a studio we taught at University of Innsbruck, where we had the dream of recreating the impression of permafrost. So frozen nature, frozen landscape, as you can see here, in space. And this was kind of the driving agent where I said, it's fascinating if we could recreate something like this. And here you can see some of the works that our students were doing in 2017 and 18 on freezing soil in mid-air. So this was kind of the tasks we gave them. And by doing these first experiments, we started to see that we have to develop 3 different distinct research areas to achieve this goal of frozen earth in mid-air. And it showed us that we have to focus on soil research, we have to focus on organic binders, and we have to look at how we can fabricate environments. So we tested different soils, we classified them, we looked at their stratification, we looked at different layers and different values. So the top organic layer, for instance, of soil is where the plants grow. So this is the one where you should not create architecture from it. It's the one that you can actually grow plants in. Then the initial organic layer that has a lot of clay that is easier to form. We looked at how we can classify soil in mechanical, physical, and mechanical parts. And specifically, we looked at the chemical ones, so the idea of what do we need to do as parameters to form or control earth as a building material. So in this part of the research, we really did the first initial tests in 2018, saying, okay, we figured out we need to have a chemical binder that combines the particle of the soil. We need pressure to put this together. We started with a wide range of different organic soil and hydrogel ratios. So we did biodegradable binders because, of course, we said, what kind of architecture would that be if we use soil and then we use a binder that is completely unsustainable? We wanted to create an architecture that you can dissolve entirely once it is built. So there were several methods that we investigated, and I always like to also show this picture because, of course, our first tests were manually. So even though later, 2021, we built the entire thing with robots, our first tests to find all the ratios, to figure out what are the parameters that our system needs, we needed to do the first tests manually. And after we find the right hydrogel ratios, we also realized the shrinkage ratios. There is a paper on all of this, so I will not bore you with all the technical details. We figured out what could work with us and the advantages as well as disadvantages, and also the influences of the different binders on the on the design itself. We also started to look at how we can fabricate it. You saw that the first tests were manual, but of course the goal at the end of the project was to create a robotically fabricated soil structure. So we started to look into binder jetting. The reason for that was that we were interested in a high resolution soil surface. So this was something that, looking at other soil research, other people go other directions, we wanted to have a soil structure where people are wondering what the material is. So you look at something that is so high resolution that you would never understand what is the material that is made of. So throughout all the soil 3D printing and the robotic gardens, we use binder jetting as a fabrication process. And all the methods that we found in the manual fabrication, we translated then this knowledge into a multi-robot fabrication process, especially focused on the path optimization in relation to robot speed. So the gradient related to the amount of binder deposited, and slower speed corresponded to higher quantities. So we needed to create a path that was relating to the material properties of soil, so different densities and patterns of algorithmic filling paths, to find an ideal combination of minimal printing time, at the same time keeping the high precision, keeping into consideration the thickness of the extrusion nozzle and of course the expansion of the binding agent of the material. At the same time, it was for us not just a question of sustainability and biodegradability, because I would almost say this was for us a given that we have to do it this way. We didn't even question that. But it was a question also of aesthetic that we picked soil. What interested us in soil was soil is a granular material. So the research was on how can we find mediated forms of manufacturing and computing that takes into account both the imprecision of the material system in comparison to the rigid order of computational control, for instance. So in the picture you can see a forecast of the surface quality of the final result that we had at the first installation. So it showed a material that is changing. It showed a material that we also added as a different surface treatment. And it had, for instance, cracking that we intended to happen, but we did not plan it. So the idea was that you can plan for cracking, but you do not plan for the exact position. And the research on the soil 3D printing, as I said, started in 2018, had 3 main installations, 2018, 19, and 2021. And it showcased different steps of the research. So always when we say, okay, we had this at the Biennale, we always say it's a long research that happened before that we could reach that scale at the Biennale. So the first one was by Hohe Beauty at Ars Electronica, where we tested, is it possible to use this method to create an architecture that is interesting? And we tested first ideas of using the robots not just as a fabricator, but also later to scan, for instance, the scale. And we tested what it means for humans to later inhabit that environment. But Hohe Beauty was completely fabricated at the University of Innsbruck. We shipped that in containers and unpacked and excavated it in the Ars Electronica. So it was a very risky thing. We had to mark the things. It worked out. The next step was to also investigate the plants that we want to have in the garden. So we said, okay, we are happy with the idea of having soil. And then we said, okay, it's almost like we have an anti-garden. So against the green, what can we have as a plant that you not immediately understand as natural? And we worked together with a mushroom company in Innsbruck, producing completely artificial, so like these mushrooms like this, they grow them in the lab. So even though they have attributes that are natural, they are per se artificial. And we were interested in this aesthetic when you come as a visitor and you see elements, and that's what I talked before about these strange comforts. You see elements that feel familiar, but at the same time you feel elements that make you feel a little bit of a discomfort as a visitor. These projects happened before the Magic Queen happened in 2021. The Magic Queen, we got an invite and they said, can you do a big soil structure? We said yes. We never tested it in that scale. We said yes, because we risk it all. It was in the midst of COVID. So it was, Venice was on lockdown. We went with the entire office to Venice, and we lived in Venice for 3 months, and built the entire structure on site. So this was one of the things that we said, when we did it at Ars Electronica, we shipped everything with a truck, and we did not like this. This was something where we said, this feels contradictory with the idea of the project. We want to build everything on site. So we resettled the office to Venice. We started to work directly in the Arsenale. We worked together with ABB. They were our sponsors and supported us. And we used the soil directly from Mestre. So we said we use local soil, we use binder that we mix there, and we create an exhibition piece that is produced from local ingredients, and we leave only with the robots. So we come with the robots and we leave with the robots. And here you can see with the binder threading technique that we are using. The first project, I explained that we had 2 robots. Here we used a system where we switched the pressing and the depositing of the binder. So here you see how the system works. You have a layer of soil. You're depositing a binder, so nothing else than a glue. You add another layer of soil on top of this. And then you use the robot to compress this layer of soil in another way. We had 2 different robots for different scale of prototypes. And we were fabricating everything in 3 months. Because we used the biodegradable binders, they don't harden immediately. So what we had to do was we had drying zones, production zones. So here you see our drying zones where we had the different elements for a specific amount of time. Something that I personally find very interesting is this archaeological activity that you have to do then, which is just undig the pieces that you find in these boxes. And to be very honest and frank, the first time we did it, I was terrified that there's nothing inside, but thankfully it worked out. And I say that because, of course, with these biodegradable binders, it's very sensitive to environmental context. So a very humid environment has a different drying time. So you need to really consider the environment you're fabricating in. And here you see what happened after we finished fabricating was this idea of the role of the machine in the architecture then, or in the garden. So not just using the machine as a fabricator that we then kind of send back, but also include the machine later in the architecture itself as part of kind of an inhabitant that helps the structure to survive, to continue to grow, and to continue to change. Here you see that all the individual elements were built so that we can move them in place. This was due of our fabrication reach that we were doing. Here you can see some pictures of the setup when we were assembling the entire structure. Our floor plan of the Magic Queen, keeping track of where each element has to go. I always like to show this picture because it shows this idea of the relation between the environment. We had to put heating lamps just to increase the speed of drying because Venice is a very humid environment. So even though we would have produced this architecture somewhere else, it would have looked entirely different because the material itself would have reacted entirely different. So even though all the parameters, all the computational model is the same, the architecture in itself stays hyperlocal and hypertemporal. That means it really matters who excavates the structure, how it dries, how is the environment. And we started to investigate this idea of soil is a fertile ground. So it's a ground of plants to start to grow in. This was something that we started, I show in the next project. We started there, it was very difficult there because Arsenale is dark. But we started to place seeds and waiting if it grows and where it grows. I already mentioned that we used the robot as kind of an inhabitant of the structure, or a robotic gardener. That means the robot as something that observes and caresses or cares for the structure. For that, we built a very specific end effector that, at least at the Magic Queen, was continuously scanning the structure. And as an effect, or as to visualize this scanning and the understanding of what the machine sees, to the audience, we translated that to an audio installation that accompanied it. Similar to the idea that if you enter a garden or if you enter the woods, that you hear, you see, you smell. So this is this idea of performative architecture that is not just going on one sense, but it tries to talk to all senses as much as possible. Here you can hear how the sound was generated in real time. So the whole structure, so the robot continuously moved for 6 months and continuously scanned the architecture for 6 months. The sound changed throughout these 6 months because we sampled the sound, so it's not just one sound that played over and over. We had samples that were resampled according to the depth sensors, but also you see that we have some object detection in the camera system that then reacted to how many visitors were seen, how many plants were seen. And the more cracks the structure got over the period of time, or the more plants grew, the more the sound changed either to more natural sounds or to more artificial sounds. Here you can see a picture from the top view before it started to grow. Here you can see that we had at the beginning some mushrooms that started to grow. You also see that the structure looks very distinct. So here again we did this cracking. It's a surface, so we applied the binder also on the surface, and it resulted in cracking because of the surface tension that we had. To additionally give this impression that it's not soil. And we actually got a lot of time the question, why is our concrete brown? Because people did not believe us it's soil. So even if we said it's normal flower pot soil, they did not understand it because they never saw it like this. And after some time, we were lucky enough that the grass started to grow, and it became very, very green. And the reason for that was that it was so dark that it had to get extra green, at least that's my theory, to survive. And it created this even more strange garden that is hard to recognize somewhere else. And also something that we found very interesting was the relationship that the visitors started to have with the robotic gardener. And they tried to understand how this machine works, what does the machine see, especially when they started to understand that they could influence the sound they could hear in relation to their own presence. There were a lot of things that we did not succeed to do with Magic Queen. We really wanted the watering system, and we really wanted the seeding system. With the Magic Queen, we pushed a lot towards the soil 3D printing, a lot towards the developing this. We were very lucky that after the Magic Queen, we got invited at the Princesa de Asturias Foundation, the Princess of Astoria Foundation, to make another robotic garden, showcasing some things that we wanted to have in the Magic Queen, but we didn't have time. So we said, it's amazing, we're just going to continue the research, and we're going to show what we were not able to do before. And this is extending on the machine vision system, making a watering system, and a seeding system. So Silva is a hydroponic garden. It was commissioned, as I said, by the Princesa of Asturias Foundation, and it was built in Oviedo in Spain. The garden was suspended in mid-air and was cared for by 2 robotic gardeners. And with Silva, we wanted to represent a dynamic living data set in architectural and geometric terms. So the online data set should influence the growth and geometry of the garden in real time. So they had an online data set that was updating, was one of the awardees of the Princess of Asturias, and they wanted to show that as a spatial expression. So we said we take on the challenge, and we said, okay, we need to combine various disciplines to do that. So I said we combined botany, so we work with a botanist, computer vision, robotics, and algorithmic design. And for us, it resulted in this multidisciplinary landscape that delved into the interaction between nature, machines, and automation. So Silva comprised 4 essential components: 2 robotic gardeners, a vegetative canopy that was hanging suspended in air. It had, similar as before, an interactive visual, soundscape, and an interactive visual interface. Because for us, it was very important that people understand that this is actually produced in real time. So it's not pre-recorded, but it's growing and changing according to the garden. So people are continuously informed about this evolution of the garden in real time. And so the 2 robotic gardeners used machine vision, similar that we see in agricultural automation. And with the machine vision, so with the camera that we had on the robot, we were able to detect changes in the growth of the garden and release a direct response from the robot. So each robot gardener was equipped with an end effector that held a speaker, an RGB camera, a Raspberry Pi, and a pneumatic seeding and watering system. And with the Raspberry Pi, we connected the RGB camera with it and analyzed image features in real time. We used a convolutional neural network to detect specific states of the garden. And based on this and the RGB values, the robot adjusted their routine. So we were checking which plants were growing, should these plants grow in this location, how green are these plants, and according to that, the robot either watered more or less, either planted additional seeds, or moved to a specific location. Opposite to Magic Green, we had a hanging canopy, so a net membrane that was fixed on non-planar tubular frames. And we had a very thin substrate to be very lightweight and composed of moss and organic aggregates. As before, the presence and engagement of the visitors impacted the robotic garden. So this is one of the screen recordings of this interactive visual and audible soundscape that modified harmonic frameworks and was influenced by the robot movements. So the acceleration and speed of the robot affected also the evolution of the chordal patterns. These are some of the impressions of these robotic gardens, and it shows kind of the idea of how also our interaction with the environment and technology could change if we provide a ground for this interaction. The last project that I want to show is not a robotic garden, but it's a machine, it's a human, and there are microbes. And it comes from a project called Co-Corporeality, a project that was co-lead with Barbara Imhoff and Tiziano Derme. And it was from 2019 and 2021, again, a long-term project. And the goal was to create a responsive space in the era of biomediality. So that means how to create architecture that actually reacts to a human. And for that, we studied 3 different things. How can we interact as a human with architecture? What kind of machines allow us this? And which materials can we use to have a reaction? And more specifically, we looked at bacteria. So we looked at human sensory interfaces, such as eye tracking, machine learning algorithms, to design a non-verbal communication interface. We looked at different machine vision systems. We looked how we can interact with them, what are the interaction patterns, and ended up with eye tracking. Eye tracking because it has both conscious and unconscious data. So you consciously can control a machine, but not entirely. For instance, you cannot control really your pupil diameter. We investigated different machines on different scales to trigger a reaction in a material. And we researched with microbiologists on different biological systems that allow a reaction. Specifically, we looked at E. coli that reacts to different pH levels. We looked at cyanobacteria that reacts to light. And we looked at microbial cellulose that react to nutrients. And how these reactions have a different time span. So of course, when we talk about interaction with humans, we always like to have a real-time interaction. When we talk about biological systems, when we talk about gardens, we talk about patients. And so this was also something that was part of the research. And the first installation of that was e-feeder. Again, it was time of COVID. So we couldn't do exhibitions. So what we did was we worked with E. coli that reacts. So these are pH indicators that show that the environment changes. So we said E. coli reacts in real time, but we don't see it. So the only thing we can see as humans is the change of the environment, because that is large enough for us to see. So we built a machine that is part of a Zoom meeting, because that was the thing we could do back then. And you could interact, so it chose randomly one of the videos, and we could interact with our facial expressions with the machine, and then the machine decided to either feed the bacteria, kill the bacteria, or visualize the bacteria behavior. We were situated in the lab to allow this kind of reaction, and we analyzed later kind of what was the result of this interaction. So we did a 4-day interaction sessions with visitors, and after that we studied kind of the prints of the facial expressions of the visitors, and kind of a diary of an interaction. Here you can see how one of these interaction sessions worked. The setup was directly in the lab. So it was set up that you could log into the Zoom as part of a visitor. You were randomly selected. And the machine would drive on a specific location depending on the setup of interaction that we set. So we had different facial expressions. We had surprise, neutral, happy, sad. And this was then translated in specific actions. Feeding either nutrients or visualize the behavior or the state of the bacteria, or kill the bacteria. A lot of people got very angry that we killed bacteria. Yeah, I always said, well, it's interesting that people started to become very attached to bacteria. So the next exhibition, we did not kill bacteria anymore, which is degrees of life. It was the last installation that we were doing with co-reality, and we really tried to go large scale, because with the machine we were very small scale. We were very too small for our taste, and we wanted to have a more spatial, immersive experience. So we exhibited at Zentrum Fokus Forschung in Vienna, and it focused on how the visitor's presence can manipulate the fabrication of biomaterials. So it was an exhibition over a 1-week period, and we wanted that you can see after this 1 week a change in the behavior of the material, having this idea of an architecture that could react as an expression or an interaction with the human that is there, and the machine in the long run. So it was the first full-scale architectural installation that we were testing as part of the research of co-reality. So with it, we aimed to develop an interactive environment in an architecture space that can learn, grow, and decay in the relation to the human presence and behavior. So for the nonverbal communication, as I mentioned before, between the human and the living material, we were using an eye-tracking device that was able to detect where a visitor is in space and at what a visitor is looking at. And the exhibition was articulated around 3 distinct self-sustaining closed environments. So these environments hosted 3 types of bacteria. And although the enclosed environments provided the necessary environmental conditions for the bacteria to survive, they relied on human interaction and mechanical actuation to thrive. So pursuing this idea of an interactive architecture as a living system with which physical presence and new modes of observation are intertwined. So here you can see these three distinct self-sustaining closed environments hosting these three types of bacteria: the Escherichia coli bacteria, the Sucrofermenta bacteria, and the cyanobacteria strains. Here you can see the eye-tracking localization station that we needed to detect where the person is in space. And it relied on this interaction and mechanical actuation to thrive. So here you can see how I'm interacting with the Escherichia coli. And the human interaction was registered in real time by a variable eye-tracking device that recorded the human's local position and the pupil gaze direction. So for that, I used a world camera, an eye camera, and a tracking camera. And the correlation between these three cameras allowed me to detect where the eyeball is in space, or where the head is in space, and the vector of the eyeball. And by knowing also the geometry of the space, I could detect at what a person is looking at specifically. And at the same time, because I have an eyeball camera, I can also detect the pupil diameter, and that is also recording unconscious human actions that was then included in the interaction setup. So all these tracking devices was used to start an interaction routine, and at the same time we visualized this data as a projection in the space. And depending on what the human looked at in the space, the exact gaze location in the environment, and the intensity of the gaze, so that means pupil diameter, time of gaze, and frequency, a corresponding machine within this environment was activated. And this machine stimulated or fed, visualized or directed bacterial growth and behavior within these specific spots. So all three environments were triggered according to the needs of the hosted bacteria. So this is an example of the E. coli environment, and this used the color change. So the color change was in real time, initiated by the human interaction, and it visualized the metabolic process of the bacteria. So the human interaction released a specific amount of sodium hydroxide at the precise point in the medium of the bacteria, and this led to a change of the pH level in culture, which then resulted in a specific color. And through the metabolic process of the bacteria, it slowly changed back to the original color. The Sucrofermenta environment was hosting the Sucrofermenta bacteria, and it was a thick mat of biomass, and the human interaction activated a spray nozzle to drive to a defined spray location and spray neutral solution. And in that location, grow more bacteria mat. And the cyano environment worked with, so the cyanobacteria are interesting because they work on photosynthesis. So the human interaction changed the light conditions, and by switching the bacteria's growth from a light period to a dark period. If you are interested in the research, we published everything open source. The book you can just download, showing all the research projects that are involved, and of course, with all the people that are involved in the project for a long time. And I'm ending my talk here with a short mention again on my academic work, because it's within the Design++ framework. And I'm using the chance that I have here to also say, I'm very happy to say that very soon we're gonna launch Compass XR, part of the Compass family, focusing on extended reality and open source software to allow architects to have access or easier access to extended reality softwares, for assembly, to work with robots, to visualize robots. So I thought I'd use my chance that I have here and tell you this will happen approximately end of June within Design++. And with that, I'm ending my talk. Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Daniela, for this very interesting and food for thoughts, definitely food for thoughts. So by giving a bit of time maybe for the floor to think, maybe process some of the information and come up with some questions, maybe I'll formulate my first one. Something about your work that I personally find extremely interesting, it kind of stuck with me, is all the aesthetics that you use for your work. it kind of reminds me a lot of H.R. Geiger and Alien, and you know, as a bit of a sci-fi geek myself, this I found extremely interesting, extremely pleasing, at least for me. While I was sitting there, I was also thinking of the movie Prometheus, and so I don't know if everyone saw Prometheus. There is this character, the engineer, or the architect, as we call it, a super intelligent creature that use all advanced technologies and genetics to either destroy Earth or save it. The question remained at the end of the movie was not clear if the engineer was really aiming to save Earth or actually destroy it by bringing aliens and so on. So I think kind of leads me back to your work, and I think maybe extend the question to you, sort of reducing the edge between human and technologies, and start to wearing technologies and having the ability to control bacteria with our human senses and so on. So what is the role of our roles as architects, as engineers? So how these cohabiting with technology in the next, sort of in your ideas, or how do you foresee this relationship between human technology and actually the environment, how will we build better? We will build better or we will destroy it? This is like, I'm very fatalistic, but that's the question, yeah.
Thanks for your question. Towards the first comment, I find it a very interesting comment, because a lot of people ask, but do you have a specific way of designing? I would say, of course, we're still architects. So of course, everything we design, all the tools we design, it's a design action. And I think it's also very important to say, just because we use technology doesn't mean we have to step back as a designer with our specific aesthetics that we like. And with the aesthetics, what we always find very intriguing was something that seems natural or is leaning towards natural geometric language, and at the same time has this kind of twist. So when people come, they feel like it's coherent, it feels like it talks to each other, but at the same time it's disrupting them from there. So it looks natural, but then something that is normally out of concrete is out of soil. Some of the sound samples were from a violinist. So you will recognize at some point something, and then it gets disrupted. So I think that's on the design side something that we were very interested in, how on a design language you can feel a little bit of friction as a visitor to keep you interested. And at the same time, I have to say, because it's interactive architecture, performative architecture, it's very hard because you need to experience the space. It's a lot with the smell, which I cannot even show here. If you build with soil, the whole room smells like soil. If you build with mushrooms, it smells like mushrooms. So it's the combination of all this input that as a visitor that you have to have, that it also makes it incredibly hard to show it again after it's over. So it's also on this side. With the interaction, I mean, it's almost for me impossible to not approach architecture that way. I always have to say I'm extremely fascinated how the advancements that we have with space travel, the advancement that we have with in the mountains, so in very rough environments when we have to question. So if we are in rough environments, we have to question our relation to the environment. What do we need? What do we need to survive? And is that all that we want to give to architecture? So this idea that the interaction drives the architecture and recreates it has a lot to do with this idea, okay, it's not just about sheltering. It's a lot about this communication with the environment. I think this is something that I'm very interested in, this communication with the environment. And then at the same time, I think it leads to a more sustainable building, because to do that, you need to understand the complexity of environments, the influence that we have on systems, natural systems, the impact that we have. And at the same time, the good and bad, because immediately we start to understand if we make a watering machine, what does that mean? A watering robot can help us to use less water, but it also could lead to monocultures. So I think just dealing with these technologies immediately start to help us evaluate it. And especially as architects, I think we have to do that, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. So the floor is open. Anyone has any questions, then maybe we'll let you address to Daniela. Thank you, Fabio.
Thank you, Daniela. It's impressive to see this aspect of your work in such a condensed way. I mean, it's all work we have sort of recognized, but never, you know, got presented in such a consistent way. Now, my question is, how do you, and I mean, this is a general question, but I think you could answer it. How do you deal with these very different, you know, aspects of your work? So being an artist, being an architect, and being a scientist. And for you, these three things just belong together. You know, we're discussing today. So how you know, these things, if you work with this medium, then you do not distinguish between the methods, or you start to blend them into each other. But from an external perspective, these are worlds that don't really belong together, or you know, it creates questions, or that creates expectations in the good and in the bad. You know, and you navigate very successfully, I would say, these three completely disconnected plateaus. You know, and plus also in you know, at the same time, because this stuff has you know, it's been done while you were doing research here, a PhD. So this is also a bit of a dangerous message here. You know, yeah. So my question is, you know, there are pros and cons in being what you are, and you know, it gives you an enormous power, but probably sometimes you also have to explain to people, you know, what's the relation with these things, and yeah, being able then to convince, I think is extremely important. And this is a thing also ITA here is about you know, closing the gap between disciplines, or let's say rethinking the discipline from a perspective where these things just belong together, because we have to integrate them, otherwise, you know, we will not move forward.
I got this question very often, like how are these two separate worlds, how can they interact? How can I plan an AR system for construction and at the same time make a garden with a robot? And for me, it's not different at all. For me, it's at the same time, it's an actuator. You have sensors. With one thing, you look at the result with an artistic eye. You ask on a philosophical level, what does that mean? And in an academic environment, you ask, what does it mean on an impact in the architectural production that is there? I think it's also important to kind of to have it as a refreshing point of view. I always have to say what binds it all together is that we, to make all of this work, we have to produce it. So we actually have to do the research. And this is just plain down-to-earth research. It means I have to detect where an eye is. I need to know where the body position is. I need to understand how to trigger a machine then. So these are very dry research questions that, because we don't give them away, we try to do them ourselves. I think this is one of the key aspects that we say we need to control that, because if you're not, at least in our work, we try to be truthful to the medium. So if it's an interactive thing, we want it to really change continuously, which is a terrible amount of work, which always breaks, which makes continuous research necessary. And I see completely the same value in doing a brick wall for industry, because it has different questions, but equally interesting. And I do think at one point these questions come together because they embrace complexity of systems, the importance of dealing with these complexities of the systems, and understanding, and I think this is one of the things that glues things together, is also what makes us human. In all of this project is still the question, how do we communicate? How do I understand what the machine wants from me? And what does it mean? Do I need to know? That's the question in some research questions. In some projects, I want to know what is the meaning behind this interaction. So this is always the kind of, but it is also difficult for oneself, I would say. Because of course, you try to, like, you are in multiple disciplines. I say, as long as I'm still finding interesting parts, I'm quite happy.
It's exactly this I want to know, because you are not doing what people would expect. People expect the artist to be the artist. There is a cliche, you know, he has to serve or she has to serve. And this same applies to architecture and to science. And you just merge together and create a certain confusion, you know, and this, yeah, absolutely, you know, I like it too, but sometimes probably it must also be hindering.
I have to say we were lucky in the moment when we started to do this research, this art and science domain came up, which is per se confusion, which is per se that a scientist can become an artist can become a scientist, and architects are anyhow always somewhere in between these things, and it becomes slowly more recognized in also as a research methodology. And I think that's also where it comes in as just as a methodology of research.
Any more questions? So let's say that maybe we continue the discussion over the drinks on the other on the back. Before you leave, can we quickly? Okay, just don't forget. So we meet. So our next talk. Our next talk is Tuesday, the 30th of April. We'll have Professor Sarah Kenderdine. I'm sorry to mispronounce it. So please don't miss it. Feel free to join. There will be always an apéro after that. So we're very happy to see you all back for our next event. With that, we'll thank again Daniela. So we give her again another big applause. And yes, let's enjoy the apéro then. Thank you again.